This is Dr. Jeanne Schul, and we're going to be tending a dream using Dr. Stephen Aizenstat's approach, which is called dream tending. Dr. Aizenstat talks about dreams being alive, and you will also hear him describe the idea that everything is dreaming. Part of his philosophy is that every night the dreaming psyche is generating something of our own personal mythology. So in working my own dream, using Eisenstat's approach, I'll begin with associations. And when you think about associations, these relate to your past. They could be related to memories from childhood, memories based on a relationship, whether it's with a partner, with a sibling, with a parent. Also, associations might be beyond just intellectual. They may be of the senses. Perhaps you get a fragrance in the dream and know immediately, this comes from my grandmother's flower garden. Or perhaps you touch something, that tactile contact in the dream brings back very vivid memories of a particular time in your life. Even with nightmares, we go back to what is the setting and what does this take us to begin to sort through and unpack how the current dream relates to our past. Then Steve Aizenstat talks about amplification. What he means by this frame of reference is to connect with the collective unconscious. So if associations bring us to our personal past and our personal unconscious, then amplification connects us with the archetypal realm. This can be mythology, it can be stories from our childhood, fairy tales, can be folk tales. All of these can also relate to the stories of many of the world religions. And then the third A takes us into animation. And this tends to be fairly specific to Eisenstat's approach. With animation, we're talking about enlivening the dream, bringing it into physical moving form, if possible. His approach really invites the dream images into a living embodied reality. And when we work our dreams through dream tending, we can get the feeling that these dream figures, these dream animals, these dream people actually come alive and we can interact with them. According to Aizenstat, animation brings the image to life in the here and now, in present time. And so when we write down our dreams, Aizenstat always recommends that we write them in first person, I, but that we also make sure that our verbs are present tense. We're not talking about the dream that we had yesterday. We record it like we're immediately current time in the dream. So with that, I'll share a personal dream that visited me 20 years ago now. In a dark January night, about 3:30 a.m., I'm sliding down a bank of rocks, walrus-like, into the sea. I am a walrus, basking in the sun on this rocky precipice. The sea calls to me in all its frigid beauty. and I come. As I look down at the rocks over which I glide, I see my own human hands caressing each stone in my descent to the sea. The sea is unknown to me. It calls me with the allure of self-knowledge. Each rock is a piece of myself that I honor through the caress of my hand as I descend, down, down into the deep. I am without fear. I go without question. I am discovering a calling. I am compelled to answer. And I named this Walrus Woman dream. Now, from the beginning, I will share that I had this dream right after I began Jungian analysis. So it's an initial Jungian dream analysis offering, which is significant. Also, this idea of walruses was something I had no experience with, nor did I have any sense of a cold, cold ocean. So we'll continue, but I will also add that for me to go into the unknown without fear was not my normal mode of functioning, to be quite honest. So the first thing that Ernest Hartman, a dream researcher, recommends is that we identify the central dream image. This was very clear to me as both the witness of the dream and the Walrus Woman central character of the dream. The fact that I had transformed, that the majority of my being looked like a walrus, but I saw my own hands, which also related to my mother's hands. That's what held the energy for me. And so that's where I went with both the naming of the dream and the investigation, so to speak, of the dream. Dr. Aizenstat tells us that the language we use with our dreams can bring them alive. So instead of me describing the walrus that was half human, half walrus, he suggests removing the A, any of the articles, and to capitalize the name so that our dream image becomes a proper name. I will also say that as I look at this image that came up for me as I worked with the dream, I'm realizing now that the ocean is often associated with the unconscious, and very often the collective unconscious, but also with emotion. Water is often an image for emotion in our dreams. So, Walrus Woman became the name of the dream. It's what had the most energy for me. And in the middle of the night, as I was writing this dream in my journal, having woke up in quite a fright, I practically jumped out of my bed. I went to my study and had no fear of losing any part of the dream because it was so embodied. I felt it somatically in my skin. But as I was writing it up, I just felt like, I need to get on the computer with this. It's just so much. And in a way, I wanted to get some space from it because it was quite overwhelming. But even as I typed it into the computer Word document, it began to transform into a sort of poem. And this is a suggestion that many authors describe as a way of working with dream, because it tends to make the language of the dream more concise And it drops us, of course, into that mythopoetic realm that is very comfortable with dream. So, the poem that evolved pretty directly is Walrus Woman. I am a walrus, basking in the sun on a rocky precipice. The ocean calls to me in all its frigid beauty, and I come. I slide down a bank of rocks on my belly, and I look down at the rocks over which I glide. I see my hands caressing each stone on my descent. The sea is unknown to me. It calls me with the allure of self-revelation. Each rock is a piece of myself that I honor through the caress of my hand as I descend down, down into the deep. I am without fear. I go without question. I hear a calling. I am compelled to answer. So initially, I had no history with walruses. I didn't have much history with really cold oceans. I knew the Gulf, which is very warm, and the Atlantic, which is much warmer than the water that I was experiencing in this dream. So, as Aizenstat recommends, I did get curious. I wondered, what's going on? What about this descent into the ocean? And I also took note of how somatic this dream was, how embodied an experience it was for me. So that's where I began, with this curious energy. When we work with dream tending, Aizenstat always points us toward the core questions, and these involve who is visiting now, as well as what is happening here. Of course, the who is visiting now is answered by Walrus Woman, and the what is happening here, the physical movement, of course, is the descent. It's the caressing of the stones, that sense of connecting with pieces of the whole. But it's also about diving deeply into this unknown ocean. So another way of working the dream is through amplification. And in Animal Spirits, Saunders tells us seals and walruses figure in some cultures as primordial ancestors, capable of assuming human form. And although I thought I had morphed into a walrus in the dream, I also took note of Saunders' depiction. Folklore preserves echoes of seals taking human appearance, often for mating purposes. Scottish men could marry such seal women as long as they kept their pelts hidden from them to prevent their return to the sea. Well, to my shock and amazement, this story of the Selkie, this seal woman, did have connection with my ancestors. My maternal grandfather was Scottish, and it then reminded me of Clarissa's tales about the Selkies and women who run with the wolves. She tells us that in seal skin, soul skin, we're looking at a tale of capture, theft of treasure, and of a deep longing to return to one's true nature. She also asserts the seal is one of the most beautiful of all symbols of the wild soul. which amplifies the torment of being held prisoner. This really resonated with me on a very embodied level. It wasn't just an interesting intellectual idea. I felt a real reverberation in my being in reading this, because at that point in my life, I was at the beginning of a transition that I wasn't even yet aware of. And this sense of being held prisoner felt true. When we look at these mysterious visitations, such as this archetypal animal, part human, we drop into what is discussed in the idea of the numinous as the darkly numinous, that which has a sense of mysterium and really animates a sense of the unknown, and the emotions that come up are neither positive or negative. And so they invite us into further exploration. I didn't know what the dream image was at the time, because I had no real-world experience of frigid oceans and walruses or seals. However, the dream image stayed with me. A little more than 2 years later, I found myself at the beach in Carpinteria, California. Just before dawn, as I walked down the beach and saw a profile up ahead, which startled me in its similarity to my profile in the dream. And it brought me to my knees, quite literally. This is who I saw in front of me. In the dream, this body was very uplifted, very much like in yoga, cobra position, with the upper body extended skyward and the lower body in contact with the earth. And I was so profoundly moved by seeing this image, so a synchronicity. I dreamed it. And then suddenly, 2 years later, as I'm studying dreams, this being appears in front of me in the most profound way. So, there was this incredible sense of recognition. I came to realize that I had come home to my dream, that the whiskered face of my dream was not a walrus at all, but a harbor seal, and the dreamscape was Carpinteria State Beach, which is the area in which I was doing dream tending with Steve Aizenstat. Now, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, Estes talks about homing as returning to oneself. And she explains, home is a sustained mood or sense that allows us to experience feelings not necessarily sustained in the mundane world. Wonder, vision, peace, freedom from worry, freedom from demands, freedom from constant clacking. I will say that after the experience of having this harbor seal in front of me, I realized that I had seen a sculpture, actually a fountain, very similar to her image, in the main drag of Carpinteria's little beach town. across from the place I was having breakfast. But at the time, again, I didn't know the difference between a walrus and a seal. And so while I took in this image, I hadn't yet connected it with my dream. But synchronicities continued, and I noticed as I was going into Carpinteria State Beach that there was a sculpture in a circular sand environment of, again, a female seal with her pup. And on one of my walks along the beach after that initial meeting with the seal, I was witness to the rookery where a great number of female seals were nursing their young on the beach. And again, the synchronicity was extremely awe-inspiring for me, and just made me very aware that this dream had still much more to unveil for me. Again, walking along the beach at Carpinteria, when the tide is out, it's possible to walk around this cliff. But the first time I approached this cliff on a long walk on the beach, again, I had this incredibly powerful awareness or recognition that that's the precipice and that's the descent that I took in my dream. Shocking. I was just incredibly certain that was my truth. So, in working with Steve Aizenstat, after I finished the 6-month training and began my PhD graduate work at Pacifica, I also entered into advanced dream tending training. And this was a very different environment than the initial training. This was in a very large group, in a theater setting. And when Steve called for dreams to be offered, mine was selected. And so as he invited me onto stage, knowing that I was comfortable animating dreams, he took me from essentially the end of my dream, which was diving into the ocean and descending deeper and deeper. And we began essentially to dream the dream onward through animation. So he invited me to move freely as though I was this sea Selkie, this walrus woman. And after a time, it took me a while to deepen into this idea of the frigid water, imagining my seal skin and seeing with eyes that could function underwater. Steve recognized that in me and then asked, "What do you see?" And what struck me is with that question, I realized I saw a light in the depths of the ocean, in this imaginal dreamscape. And later I resonated with Este's statement that nothing makes the light, the wonder, the treasure stand out so well as darkness. So in this deep, dark, oceanic embrace that I was receiving, I saw this little bit of light, and he recommended, he encouraged me to go deeper, to follow the light. And as I did, I realized I was moving into a cave. With his support, I didn't feel afraid in this imaginal realm. And later came to discover that on the northwest of the U.S., there actually are these caves where sea lions come in. And this image I found just incredibly compelling. I knew nothing about this at the time of this active imagination with Aizenstat. But in this cave, in this imaginal realm, I realized that I still saw light beneath the water. And again, Steve encouraged me to dive deeper. And as I did, I came up with something I could hold in my hand that looked luminous. Perhaps it was phosphorescent. The closest that I found in real life when the dream finished was this amulet that a friend later gifted me with. And it was this sense of really finding a treasure. And once I had this in my hand, Dr. Aizenstat invited me to resurface, to come back up, and to bring the treasure with me. And again, out of this working the dream and over the years revisiting this poem, it morphed into another rendition, very similar, but this time I called it Sea Selkie. I am a Selkie basking in the sun on a rocky precipice. The ocean calls to me in all its frigid beauty, and I come. I slide down a bank of rocks on my belly. As I look down at the rocks over which I glide, I see my hand caressing each stone on my descent. The sea is unknown to me. It calls me with the allure of self-revelation. Each rock is a piece of myself that I honor through the caress of my hand as I descend down, down into the deep. I am without fear. I go without question. I hear a calling. I am compelled to answer. And although this poem has not begun to articulate my discovery in dream tending with Steve Aizenstat, what I am even now coming to realize, nearly 20 years later in working the dream, that this sense of calling had everything to do with me choosing Pacifica Graduate Institute. And the sense of being fearless had everything to do with the love I felt for dream work and for what I was discovering in depth psychology. And I found that this dream was like a manifestation of this sense of answering the call of vocation. And I think the treasure not only involved earning my PhD, finishing my dissertation within that 2-year period and becoming faculty at Pacifica. But it also helped me not second guess myself, wondering all the what ifs. So it continues to have power for me even over time. And again, a piece of that is because of the archetypal nature of the dream. And also that it's not just for me. That's the nature of archetypal dreams. They come from the collective unconscious, and therefore their message is not for only one person. And I'm reminded of this most times when I walk Carpinteria State Beach, because synchronicities continue to remind me of the gift, the treasure of this dream. Because as I walk many, many times, a seal has seemingly accompanied me for long stretches, just staying just a little off the coast, off the beach, and seemingly looking at me, which is has just offered me a real sense of connection between dream time and real time that I deeply appreciate. These are the references that I shared information about, and I want to say that the Song of the Sea and the Secret of Roanish are some creations through film that offer another way of imagining the sea Selkie. Thank you for listening.